Real quick, before we get into the show, I wanted to share a new service called Getita that Ken and I have been using that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?
Welcome everyone to the Firing the Man podcast, a show for anyone who wants to be their own boss. If you sit in a cubicle every day and know you are capable of more, then join us. This show will help you build a business and grow your passive income streams in just a few short hours per day. And now your hosts, serial entrepreneurs David Schomer and Ken Wilson.
Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. In today's episode, we are excited to have Chad Rubin, a seasoned e-commerce entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of Prophecy, join us. Chad's journey in the e-commerce world began in 2008, and since then, he has founded multiple successful ventures, including Think Crucial, Skubana, and The Prosper Show. His expertise spans across e-commerce operations, Amazon strategies, and leveraging AI to optimize business processes. Chad is also the author of the Amazon bestseller, Cheaper, Easier, Direct, which guides readers on disrupting industries to uncover success. In this episode, we'll delve into Chad's entrepreneurial journey, discuss the evolution of e-commerce, and explore how AI is transforming the industry. Chad, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here, and thanks for that intro.
Absolutely. So for those of you who have not heard your story, you started your e-commerce journey back in 2008 by taking your family's vacuum business online. Can you share what motivated you to make that transition and how it shaped your entrepreneurial path?
Yeah, well, first of all, I came from nothing. So I grew up sort of trying to scrape a couple of pennies together, finding pennies in the couch cushion. So one thing I never wanted to do is I never wanted to be in the vacuum industry, and I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I decided to be a first-gen college grad, and I went to Wall Street. And while I was there, I was covering a stock, which was Amazon. And Amazon had just launched the marketplace. And sure enough, I said to my mom, dad, I said, you guys need to be selling your stuff on Amazon. Like Walmart just opened next door to you. And so that was really the beginning and the genesis of getting involved on Amazon. So while I was on Wall Street, I would moonlight, and like my parents would use my credit card to buy inventory. My dad would do the shipping. My mother would do the customer support, and I would do all the marketing, listing creation, marketing, et cetera, product ideas and opportunities. And that's how it all started.
I really like that background. And one thing, we have similar backgrounds. So I was CPA, CFA, worked in financial services industry, and that would have been 2013 era. When I talked about leaving this highly touted position and going and selling on e-commerce, I was laughed at. It wasn't taken seriously. Did you experience a similar thing?
Totally. So my grandmother's best friend, we went to visit her, and she sits down and she has plastic on the couches. So this is the kind of like old school mentality. And she's like, "Well, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I'm doing e-commerce." Right? And I try to explain to her what e-commerce was back in the days before she passed. And she's like, "You need to be a lawyer. You need to be a doctor. What are you doing wasting your time doing this thing?" And I think it's just like an old school way of looking at the world. And luckily, like I was able to also, by the way, I shared earlier that like I had no interest in being an entrepreneur, because like to me, growing up with a family who's struggling and can't pay bills, and my mother is literally trying to charge each credit card on the grocery line while everyone's heckling at her, was not a way that I wanted to grow up to live in the world or even have a family in the world. And luckily, even that narrative changed once I started seeing that was a limiting belief.
Okay. I really like that. And this podcast is called Firing the Man. And so I want to dive into this story a little bit. So at what point did you say, I'm going to try out e-commerce, and hey, this could work. I might quit my Wall Street job and do this full time. What was that process like?
So funny enough, so I was on Wall Street. So you were on the other side of things. I was doing equity research. So I was advising investors to buy, sell, or short stocks, hedge funds, institutional investors. And to me, I always believed in picking not your job, but picking your boss. So I always would pick bosses that really cared about my interest in growing and investing in me. So then I got assigned a new boss who came in from another company, and I didn't even interview with him. I didn't pick him. I just was assigned to him, and he had no interest in seeing me grow. Well, sure enough, he's making stock picks that I disagreed on, and for good reason, because he was not actually being honest with his stock picks, he wasn't being honest. And I slowly started seeing his phone was ringing, and the HR was calling him all the time. And sure enough, 2 weeks after that, boom, he fired me. So he fired me. My father, so I'm still doing this moonlighting, right? I'm doing e-com. I'm making a lot of money on Wall Street. My father drives into New York City to pick me up. I don't share this story often. And I've got my box of stuff on the side of the road, and he picks me up, and it's kind of quiet. And we pull over to my apartment on the Upper West Side in New York City. And he looks at me, and I live next to a school, an elementary school. Kids were getting out of school with their lunch boxes. And he's like, hey, those kids are free, and so are you. And that was really the ember that he kind of blew on a little bit, that really created this spark to say, you know what? Let me see how this works. And the rest is history.
I like it. The day that you quit, so you got fired.
I got fired.
So the man
booted,
fired you.
The man fired me, but I was miserable. I was overweight. I was waking up at 5 a.m. and sometimes I would sleep at the office. And this guy was watching who knows what on his computer, or skiing, or not around, not caring about me or my life or my family. And something had to change. I just didn't want to give up what I had. And then it was pulled from me. And that's really when you start to shine, right? When you start experiencing these fires, pun intended, you start experiencing that, and that is telling of your character and how you handle these tough situations.
Outstanding. So you get fired, in where do you go from there?
Well, I started to really explore private label further, because we were just reselling a lot of my parents' product. So I started getting deliveries from China on the Upper West Side in my apartment, fulfilling FBA, doing merchant fulfilled. And then my wife was like, hey, this is not a warehouse. It was a small apartment. It was a duplex, but it was a small apartment. And she said, you need your own space. So I got a warehouse in Harlem and started growing tremendously. At that point, right, there was not a lot of private label at all. Private label wasn't even a thing. It's just that I was tired of competing for the buy box. I didn't want to compete with other sellers. So I was like, I need to own this. And the only way to own it is to have a trademark and create your own brand. This is way before Amazing Selling Machine and all these courses came out. This is high gross margin Amazon with no ad spend, pure organic with no other private labels on the market.
The Wild West. I remember those days, and boy, do I wish we could go back to 40 to 50% margins, go find something on Alibaba. Yeah. Those were the good days. So you founded several companies. Think Crucial, Skubana, The Prosper Show, which I'm a huge fan of and have attended several times and talked about on this program quite a bit. So what are some key challenges you faced when you were scaling these businesses, and how did you overcome them?
I think everything comes down, well, I guess that's a very broad question. I'm trying to think about, I've had talent issues, which are people issues. I've had operational issues. We've had funding issues. If you think about the transition for me, right, I grew up not wealthy, first generation college grad, stepped into Amazon just by finding out, looking at the stock of Amazon and what Amazon was talking about during their filings. Started selling on Amazon, great. And then suddenly I go from selling vacuum filters, which is an interesting transition, to creating a software and co-founding a conference. It's a very it's there's not a lot of sellers that can go from selling to software. It's a very different competency, and it's difficult to pull off. And so software in general, I think, is really hard because there's something called the J curve. So you have to put out a massive amount of expenditure and R&D and engineering development until you recover that investment. Like, so on Amazon, if you're buying off Alibaba and you're putting $10,000 in, you list it, you get an FBA, boom, okay. The turnaround time is like, let's just say 3 weeks on the water, unless you airship it. Then you launch it on Amazon FBA and boom, it's in your warehouse, you're ready to rock. For software, it's like you have to build, you have to iterate, you have to fix, you have to keep building, and you're funding all of this while it's happening. And so you're essentially in the negative for a long time, a long duration, and then eventually hoping to get to profit.
Yeah, I have heard of some software nightmares where you go to the bottom of that J curve, but you don't hop out of it. And yeah, it seems like, you know, when you were talking about issues, there wasn't one particular type of issue that you mentioned. It was a lot of different types. And I think that's one thing I found with entrepreneurship is there's always going to be something. And if you're in entrepreneurship, you put out fires, and it's just, it's part of it. And so now I'd like to turn the corner and talk about prophecy. And I will share with the listeners, this is a tool that I've been using for about 6 months now and really, really like. And we'll talk about it more, but I would like to know what was kind of let's start with, what is prophecy?
Prophecy is a dynamic pricing software for brands that sell on Amazon. So we dynamically change price to maximize your intention. It could be revenue, it could be profit, could be velocity and BSR, but we're using price as a lever. Instead of throwing more money on advertising, we dynamically adjust price and use that as a lever to have it all drop to the bottom line for your business.
Okay. And what was the aha moment where you said, there's a need here? I'm gonna move forward with this. I'm gonna take this idea and bring it to fruition.
Yeah. So after I would say like my big boy exit of Skubana in 2021, I worked at the other company, but I was still finding purpose. And so I was still running my e-commerce business, the one that I started, the vacuum filter company, and it was getting just nailed. We're losing money. It's blood everywhere. And, I'm listening to all the people in the Amazon space, and they're saying, oh, you got to optimize your listing. You need to find a new PPC agency. And I started doing all these things that they were telling me to do. And it wasn't working. So I was trying to turn around this company. Suddenly, I'm sitting outside looking at it. I live in Miami now. I'm looking at a palm tree and I'm like, what's another lever I can pull? Price. And why don't we change price? Well, people say that you shouldn't change price on Amazon, or people just tell you to change price when there's inflation, so you go up 5%, but there's a second order of consequence that happens that makes pricing on Amazon super hard, which is the fact that when you change price, it impacts your discoverability sometimes, your ranking. Not always, but like it could have a knock-on effect. A second order of consequence happens when you make a price change. And your price today affects your order volume tomorrow. So how do I have 250 private label products with bundles and kits. We're not changing price. Why? We haven't changed price in a very long time, just stale, outdated prices that we've copied from another competitor who's probably out of business. So we started to manually change price. And I was like, whoa, there's something here. Like if I can intentionally and consciously change price to achieve an outcome for me, whether it's ranking or profit, like looking at all the data, I have something here. And then that's when like this AI buzz happened. It was literally at the same intersection. So it was like profit intersecting with AI. And I was like, what if we automate this and build something that can actually make these price decisions strategically and smarter than a human and at scale? And we started building. So I resigned I was working for the man again. I was working for the company that acquired me for 6 months after the acquisition. So April to October 1st, couldn't do it. Just didn't have it in me. I resigned October 1st and then raised 2.4 million December of 2021.
Okay. And when you shared this initial idea with perhaps people at the Prosper Show or people in your network, what was some of the feedback that you got?
So it's funny. I went to a celebration dinner with a bunch of other entrepreneurs, and we're celebrating my sale. And another person had sold their company too at that time, or 2 or 3 people. And someone asked the question, if you were going to start a business today, what would you do? And I mentioned this, and people were like, that's fascinating. Wait, so that doesn't exist on Amazon today? Like there's no dynamic pricing system, kind of like Uber or Expedia or even hedge funds that they use to capitalize on inefficiencies in the market? It's like, no, there's nothing that exists. And that's really when I knew, that was the reaction. And I was like, okay, I need to do this.
Very, very interesting. And one of the, so I personally have used Splitly, Profit Peak, Ava.guru. And when I got the email for Prophecy, I was like, this cannot be done. This is a fairy tale. And we can get into some of those specific reasons, but when you were taking this from idea to fruition, did you look at any of those other companies that had tried and failed?
Oh yeah. I wouldn't have created something that already existed on the market.
Okay.
I needed to do something that was big, that was bold, but I didn't want to just be a copycat. So, and by the way, I'm not saying that's a good decision, by the way. Like sometimes, like if you copy companies, it works out very well. I just personally wanted to challenge myself with something unique. And that was building AI, doing it as a single founder. And I tried out every single one of those softwares you mentioned and then some with demos, because I actually wanted to price better for my own brand. It actually was an honest research where I was like, okay, if this exists and I can automate this without having to manually change price, and I can increase profit even more in a smarter way than doing it humanly, I'll use these softwares all day long. And when I looked at these softwares, they made empty promises. They would make all these claims and then wouldn't back it up. I don't know if you've experienced the same thing as you've used those softwares.
I absolutely. And after my first experience, I would log into a portal. I would have a meeting with the agency once a week. They would say your profits are going way up. I'm a retired CPA. I love spreadsheets. My brain is organized into rows and columns. And I'd look at my P&L and net income wasn't going up. And then I'd have a meeting with the agency and they'd say, yeah, your profit's up 50%. And I grew very skeptical and started, when I would engage with one of these companies, I would have a separate spreadsheet where I was monitoring what did profitability look like before, what did it look like after. And what I was seeing was that it just wasn't there. The cost did not justify. I was not able to increase net income enough to justify the cost of these programs. And so that was my experience. And the thing that I always ran into was as price goes up, conversion rate goes down and PPC gets harder. The opposite is true. As price goes down, conversion rate goes up, PPC gets easier. But you have so many of these variables moving in opposite directions that it was hard to control for all of them. And so, in a typical like brick and mortar company, if you have margin compression and you want to increase your margins, you increase your price. This is a unique industry where when you increase your price, your net profit does not necessarily increase because your velocity goes down. Mm-hmm. And so after trying and failing with 3 different companies, I was very, very skeptical of it, to be completely honest. And I've been very impressed with the results. And that being skeptical has stayed with me. From day one, when I had signed up with Prophecy, I had my side spreadsheet where I've been independently testing profitability through Helium 10, a totally separate platform. And what I found is my profits have increased by about 23%, which is huge. And
on a gross level or operating profit?
On an operating, on a gross level before my operating expenses. Okay. So, and that's huge. The last 3 years, I've experienced major margin compression, and you've seen a lot of sellers get squeezed out of the market. They had a 15% margin and a 10% tacos and no meat on the bone to pay their operating expenses or themselves. And as we've seen this margin compression, it is really, it almost seems like this is something that you need to do as an Amazon seller. It is getting more and more competitive. 5 years ago, you didn't have to have awesome listings or, a dynamic repricer and you could make 30%. And I cherish those days, but those days are gone. COVID brought a lot of new sellers in and a lot more competition. And so I think being a very high level Amazon seller is critical to be successful here.
Yeah. I'm first of all, I'm very happy to hear that you're loving Prophecy. And my mission in general is if we help sellers and brands flourish, we will get rewarded for it. That's it. So the goal is, and I talk about this with my team all the time, if we help other people flourish, we will get rewarded. And so that's where we focus our energy. I mean, you can tell that we're very hands-on. We're really try to handhold you and optimize the outcomes. We're constantly meeting with you to go through the data. And we want to make you more effective. And if we're not making you more effective, we're not delivering on our promise and we're not doing our job.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things that I would like to get into is once you sign up for the Prophecy tool, and I found with a lot of tools, they can be great tools, but it depends on how you use them. And there are certain things that are, as an Amazon seller, are in my control. And, starting with what ASINs do I enroll? And so why don't we start there? And I'd like to kind of go through some of the user inputs and identify what are some best practices here. So if somebody signs up for Prophecy, how can they maximize their outcomes with the tool?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So in terms of just best practices in general, I would say you have to make sure you know your intention for your SKU. So you need to know, hey, am I looking to maximize profit? Do I want to make more revenue? Or do I want to make more unit velocity? There's other really important things to make sure you apply in our platform because we take into account inventory as well. So if you're overstocked on inventory, our model will start lowering price to offset the higher stock. And so really what it comes down to is you need to put in some boundaries and parameters into the platform to get the most out of our machine learning models and our AI. So sometimes people might have a boundary that's too constrictive. So your floor price and your ceiling price are too tight. And we might say, hey, we need you to uncouple that and to make the boundary larger. You might not know that perhaps you're running low on stock, but you might not have set up the inventory model in our platform to take into account your low stock level. So these small little things that our customer success team is responsible for to help you with are important things to get started with to make sure that you're successful.
On that floor and ceiling price, any suggestions there on, should you consider your PPC? What is a good starting spot there?
So floor and ceiling price of your price itself, typically a good 20% boundary is perfect. It's a great starting point. And if it needs to be larger, we'll let you know. But 20% gives room for the model to explore. And part of that, I think it's like whether you're AI or whether you're in life, right, is you need to give yourself room to explore, whether even in advertising on Amazon, right? You need to be able to explore and test. So sometimes wasted spend is okay in the beginning to figure out what's working. You're going to waste some money to figure out what keyword converts. And the same thing with price is that you need to understand how does Amazon.com, how do your competitors and how do your customers react to price changes? And so if you give the model breathing room to explore, it actually is going to have far superior data to make decisions with.
Okay. So 20% boundary. Okay. And when you're coming up with that, should you be considering your PPC?
So that's another great question. So when we first started Prophecy, like I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, entrepreneurs for the first time, you sort of learn by walking in the desert, right? So I knew that brands were losing money, but a lot of brands don't know that they're losing money. And by just setting their price once, throwing more money at ads. And so we started with the premise, hey, we're going to adjust price. And price changes alone we'll see on average a 10% lift in profit. Sometimes 20, like in your case, 30, 40, 50, 70%. But on average, we're seeing a 10% lift. As we started going further, and this is to your point around demand. So if you increase price, typically, unless you're Apple or Nike, demand will drop. And so if that's the case, if we increase price but demand drops and your PPC team doesn't know that we drop price, or your manager that's doing PPC or your software or whatever, then there's a disconnect. And so we found actually by harmonizing price and ad spend together, you can actually unlock non-linear outcomes for the business, meaning it's actually going to explode the business forward. This is the holy grail, in my opinion, of Amazon, is essentially the idea that pricing touches all parts of the business and all parts of the business have to touch price. Price, PPC, and inventory go together. And so we started to actually build out models where we know where pricing is going. We know where spend should go at a specific price point to maximize what you're trying to achieve. And so we give either our clients where that's going, or we give this to the brand agency, or we do it ourselves. We have a team in-house that's also doing this now. Now, I have this chart on my website. I don't know if I shared a screen here, people would see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a really interesting math chart. And since you're so focused on profitability, I think it would be a good thing to bring up. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Tell me if you can see it.
Yep.
See it?
Yes.
And if I scroll down here to this chart right here, I'm just going to walk you through a really interesting example. So imagine this is $25 and we increase it to 20%, so it's $30. And we also do this with ACOS. We increase ACOS from 20% to 24%. So it's a 20% increase. Now, most sellers would be like, oh, I don't want my ACoS to increase, but bear with me for a second. Landed cost remains the same. We haven't changed our cost of goods sold. Referral fee goes up 20% because the price went up, so Amazon's take goes up. The FBA fee remains flat, but gross profit goes up 60% just with these changes. Now, ad spend goes up 20% because we've, of course, adjusted our ACoS. And now our contribution profit dollars double. This is what people aren't seeing is the contribution profit and your profit on your ad spend. So your ROAS looks worse. Your ROAS and your ACoS look worse because they're tied to revenue. But those are the metrics that those are the gospel metrics that sellers have been guided to for such a long time. And so we have to change our perspective on, hey, you know what? If you harmonize and synchronize price and advertising dollars together, you can unlock a massive outcome for yourself that you didn't think you could.
I really like this, and I really like the connection between PPC and price. And what I had done for probably 5 years is, I'd meet with my PPC manager and I'd give him a PPC mandate. Here's my break-even ACoS. This is what I want you to target. And as prices move, I never really went back to reevaluate that. And as your price goes up, your break-even ACoS goes up. You can spend a little bit more. There's more meat on the bone. And so I really like that. And that example really drives that home.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say that so we have a report that we give to our clients where spend should go when a price change happens. I don't know if you're getting that internally on your side. And we're going to be even making it even more robust over time because we realize the value here. Now, I was going to give you a fun example. Let me see if I can pull up an incognito here because Amazon knows what I'm searching, but let's do this. So, okay, here's a great example. Look at these garlic presses. So you've got Zule. I don't know if you know Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
So he happens to be a customer, and this guy, $29.99. Everyone else, $9.99, $11.99, $9.99. So what's super interesting is that if you increase price, maybe there will be a less demand conversions, and typically there is, but there's a way to artificially inflate demand on Amazon, and that's through advertising dollars. And typically brands are spending 50% of their revenue, or 50% of their revenue is coming from advertising spend. So these companies at $29.99, way above the market norm, right? 11, 8, 14. At these prices that are way higher is because they are really harmonizing this price and advertising idea concept. So his profit is 3 times more than others, and they're all paying the same amount of cost per click. And so this one is saying, hey, I'm stainless steel. There's no need to peel, right? It has all these reviews. They're selling 1,000 in this past month. And if you can look at that, this is happening there as well because they understand what the optimal price point is to advertise their product relative to their ad spend.
That's huge. That's huge. I really like that. And this is one, I've noticed this where there have been certain products that we've been running this on, price has gone up, and I've thought, I didn't see that coming, and profitability goes up. There are certain items where the price goes down and profitability goes up. And I've scratched my head and said, I did not see that coming. And that's where, if I look at kind of my archaic spreadsheets where, all right, I'm going to change it on the first of the month, and then I'm going to go in it for 30 days and I'm going to do a 30-day look back and see what was the impact of this. There's just so many more price points that can be tested at multiple times a day. And so I really like that example, and it really does drive it home what Prophecy is doing. And so I like to talk about just more generally AI and its impact on e-commerce. AI is the new kid on the block. It's growing at a very rapid rate. I am a Chat GPT fanboy and find myself using it more and more and more. And so what do you think are going to be some of the impacts on e-commerce?
Oof, it's a tough question, and I'm also a fanboy of ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity. I use them a lot. I think there's a lot of directions we can take this conversation. If we're looking at what's happening today, I would say every software company in our space advertises that they're AI. Either they're not, or they're just integrating to ChatGPT, and it's some like very loose integration. I think where Prophecy is different, and it's important to like really toot my own horn here on this because we put 2.4 million into the business, and it sucks that we're competing with people who claim to have AI and are just it's really artificial, like where it's like not true. And so I think in general, pricing is going to be a massive, massive thing. And I think everybody in the space is going to be using AI pricing. It'll be the norm across Amazon and across Chinese competitors overseas. I think we're years away from that. And so to me, like pricing and I right now, if you are an early adopter, you're going to dominate. And I think that goes along with anything that happens in the Amazon space. If you're an early adopter, just like the early private label brands like me and you did when the Amazon marketplace was new, is what's happening specifically when you adopt a new software. And by the way, there might be a software out there that does like AI listing optimization that I'm not aware of, but like what I've seen is a lot of the same stuff just recycled in our space. Reimbursement companies, listing optimization. There's 50 million PPC softwares out there. And so like to me, being an early adopter to this is important. But second, to your question around AI, I think that we're still in the early innings, not just of Amazon AI, just AI in general. And I'm concerned. I read the most recent blog post, I think it was yesterday or the day before, by Sam Altman, wrote a post called Reflections. And he literally states that like we're close to AGI, which means like essentially consciousness of an artificial intelligence software, for lack of a better word. And on top of that, agents are coming out this year. And agents to me are going to be a massive disruption to the entire Amazon space. Because essentially you'll now be able to just use, not only just get the answer, but you'll have someone actually be able to implement that answer. And it's going to be a output that you're not accustomed to, right? You don't have to pay this person extra. They don't need a water break or to go to lunch. And I think that this has a very interesting change on in the entire community from an agency perspective and from a software perspective.
Absolutely. It will be. I agree with you that we're in the early innings, and it is every month there's something new, and I'm impressed by a new tool. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to do a look back in a year and see where we're at. So this has been an outstanding conversation on your background and on Prophecy. As we wind up the interview, I would like to get into the fire round. This is 4 questions that we ask every entrepreneur that we have on the show. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. What is your favorite book?
Favorite book? I really like Buyback Time just because it's very specific. It's written by Dan Martell, and there's a lot of takeaway value and a lot of homework to take away from that. And it really changed the way that I look at my time, how I'm implementing my time, and it actually has some interesting templates that I've adopted over the course of reading that book.
Very nice. I'll add that to my reading list. What are your hobbies?
Hobbies, a lot of family time. I have a 5.5-year-old that I really want to invest in and make sure he's instilled with the proper values that I either didn't get as a kid or I just want to give him a childhood that I didn't have. 2, working out. 3, reading. And 4, sometimes I like to, at least to wind down with a little hookah action.
Very nice. Very nice. What is one thing you do not miss about working for the man?
I don't miss. That's a good question. I would say control of time. Like I get to deploy my time the way that I see fit, and live and die by the sword, right? So if I misappropriate time or I squander it, like I'm fully responsible. And I think just having that autonomy and having that control of time is important to me. And and thinking about that makes me really focus on where I'm putting my time and making sure that I'm putting it in the most optimal place for the highest outcome and reward.
Very nice. Very nice. And the final question, what do you think differentiates successful e-commerce entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
So I read this book by Seth Godin, which talks about this concept. And, sometimes you hit a cul-de-sac. And anyway, it's a great book. It's talked about like when to give up and when to keep going. It's called The Dip. And I think it's hard to say exactly when you know when to keep going, when to give up. But I think when things get really, really, really hard and you have the feeling of wanting to give up in your heart when things are hard, and by staying in it, sitting in that impatience and like feeling it and navigating a way around it, I think that differentiates the successful people from the non-successful entrepreneurs. So being able to actually like sit in that horrible, horrible space, like another book, what's his name? The concept is called Wifio. We're fucked, it's over. It's by not Mark Andreessen, by Ben Horowitz. And he talks about like, there's all these moments where you're like, hey, it's over. It's done. I can't do it anymore. It's like, it's not going to work. And the startup and like a startup will see that experience many, many times. And if you can get through those moments, you're going to succeed. And so you just have to have the durability to make it happen. I know there's a long answer to your question, but it's an important one. And a lot of times it's around just psychology and gaming psychology.
Very nice. Very nice. All right. Now, if people are interested in trying out Prophecy, what is the best way?
Yeah, so they can check out Prophecy. It's PROFASEE. So prophets you could see, or a prophecy into the future, which is a biblical word. Anyway, prophecy.com. Check us out. Feel free to book a demo. I'm giving the demos actually when you book a demo. If you're interested, you can also email me, or if you want to talk shop about any of the stuff we talked about today, it's chad@prophecy.com. And of course, you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I'm here to support the community.
Outstanding. And we will post links to all of that in the show notes. Chad, want to thank you for being a guest on the Firing the Man podcast, and looking forward to continuing our work together.
Amazing. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Before you go, we wanted to share a new service that Ken and I have been using called Getita that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida.com, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?